The surplus talk's long gone. It's a spend, spend, spend budget, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen the focus from the Treasurer in the last few months has gone from very much targeted and temporary spending, stimulus spending, to now bringing forward some pretty big tax cuts, which are going to have a really, really big impact on the budget and obviously on the economy as well in terms of aggregate demand, further to Andrew Lee's point there, Pete. But like we talk about stage 2 and 3 being brought forward in the originally 2024-25, when stages 2 and 3 were due to be in together, the cost to the budget in just 1 year alone was $35 billion. So again, we're going to be talking about some big numbers, and they're not one-off numbers. They're going to be compounding year on year. So unsurprisingly, jettisoning any talk today of a surplus. That's a long, long way away now.
Yeah. Well, what about those insolvency reforms that the Treasurer is announcing today? What are the pros and what are the cons?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting conversation. It's going to be interesting to sort of see what some of the key stakeholders in the economy say. Obviously, there'll be some support from business groups and small business groups, no doubt. I think, look, there is some merits of having a look at allowing small businesses to trade in some of these difficult circumstances and keeping them out of administration. I suppose the downside risks, Pete, are that the longer making it easy for them to trade where they're basically not making a profit and continuing to run up debt, I suppose there could be a concern about liabilities accruing, particularly when it comes to workers. And so if we're keeping those small businesses operating for longer and those liabilities increasing, we're potentially looking at greater impacts for workers not being paid what they're owed at the end of the day. So we're going to have to sort of look at that from a cost-benefit perspective and across the economy too. But it's certainly an interesting conversation and a worthwhile one.
OK. Well, Paul Keating's been on the attack. There's quotes in the paper today. We've been discussing them. Even the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, on the show a little bit earlier referred to them as nasty. So basically, Paul Keating has accused the high priests of the RBA of indolence, that they should be doing more to shoulder the load. What do you make of those comments? Who's in the right here? Who's in the wrong?
Yeah, it's probably one of those things, Pete, where, as always, I think everyone's a little bit in the right, at least. Always fascinating to hear those interventions from Paul Keating, and we should always take note because we always learn a little bit more, particularly about the English language as we go through. But look, I mean, the RBA does obviously have a focus on price stability and inflation, but sometimes we do forget that full employment is very much in the legislation and the charter that the RBA has with the government. And I think sometimes there isn't that much focus on that aspect. And I think Andrew Lee was raising some interesting questions, the interview that you had with him before, about perhaps some of the KPIs not necessarily being met when it comes to small business lending and further lending, which of course, in the economy right now really goes to businesses' ability to survive and businesses' ability to employ people and keep people employed. So, look, I think there's some interesting debates and discussions on social media regarding modern monetary theory. I think there's actually some real practical applications where the RBA could probably do more than what it's doing, but ultimately, of course, governments need to be really focusing on fiscal policy first.
What about that other huge economic news this morning, broken in the last half hour or so? Westpac, it's the largest fine in Australian corporate history, $1.3 billion. What do you make of that?
Yeah, we knew from some of these tremendous revelations last year, Pete, that Westpac, and we'll see some other announcements, I'm sure, with other banks too, we're staring at some big figures when it came to significant breaches regarding the counter-terrorism and anti-money laundering legislation. So, yeah, look, it's a really big number. But there's some pretty major breaches, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of transactions not being declared appropriately. And these laws are put in place for a reason, to make sure that there is that proper stability in the banking system, and there is some that prudential and security regulation and understanding exactly where the money is coming from when it comes to international finance, and that Australians aren't accidentally funding something they shouldn't be funding overseas. So, major breaches, big numbers, not really a surprise here, but it was always a shock to get a big number like that coming into the revenue. OK, yeah, more than they budgeted for as well. They thought it was going to be a little bit less than that. They outlined about $1 billion, so they've got to stump up another 300,000 more. Just finally, our colleague here at Sky News, Andrew Clennell, broke a pretty decent story yesterday, obtained through Freedom of Information. 3 letters that the Prime Minister Scott Morrison sent to the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, basically pushing for him to take on ADF support. Andrew says not quite the smoking gun, but there is the trend here. There is, as Josh Frydenberg says this morning, undisputable evidence that the federal government did suggest that ADF support was there. Yeah, look, I think it's a significant revelation. It'll be interesting to see in the daily press conference how Daniel Andrews responds today. I think it wasn't too long ago, Pete, we were talking about some people were saying that there was no democracy in Victoria. I think we've had a pretty thorough hotel quarantine inquiry, which the Premier himself set up. He's appeared before it. Other ministers and senior public servants have as well. I'd expect some pretty serious and some damning findings, to be frank, at the end of that, and therefore some actions for the Premier to take too. So I think accountability continues. It's very important, and to see how to get to the bottom of it as well. But ultimately, our focus does need to be on getting through COVID and getting out now. And with some really low numbers and new infections being posted in Victoria, hopefully we see an announcement this weekend coming up in terms of some further easings. I think that's what we need. It's a shot in the arm of the economy, but it's a sign that Victorians have been doing the right thing.